Sometimes, the quietest places hold the loudest secrets. And sometimes, the greatest battles aren't fought in courtrooms or across picket lines, but on land passed down through generations, where legacy runs deeper than any foundation ever poured. My name is Michael Harrington, and this isn't just a story about property. It's a story about patience, principle, and a century-old promise hidden in plain sight. What began with the sound of bulldozers on a crisp September morning became the most satisfying revenge ever written, not with fire, but with ink. This is how my great-grandfather's paranoia became my greatest weapon, against the greed that tried to steal what was never theirs to take. I never wanted to come back to Ash Hollow. Not really. Not after Mom died, and certainly not after Dad passed 2 years ago. But there was something about that land, the 80-acre spread tucked between pine groves and golden meadows, that called me like an echo from the past. It was the only constant in a life filled with deployments, relocations, and loss. My name's Noah Bellamy, former Army intelligence, 37 years old. Spent 15 years overseas learning how to read people before they even opened their mouths. You'd think I'd be better at reading bulldozers. It was just after dawn when I heard the low rumble. I was standing on the back porch, nursing a chipped mug of black coffee. My dog, Murphy, lifted his head and gave a single low bark, the kind that tells you something's off. At first, I thought it was thunder. It wasn't. I crested the east ridge of my property and froze. 3 yellow machines, lined up like tanks, were tearing into the slope my grandfather had called the Hush. That quiet glade was where I learned to fish, where Dad carved our initials into a sycamore when I was 10, and where my parents' ashes now rested. Seeing it shredded open like a wound made my chest cave in. "Hey!" I shouted, charging down the hill. A woman in a navy blue suit turned slowly, adjusting her sunglasses like I was an inconvenience. "Yes," she said, voice cool and clipped. "What the hell is going on here?" I asked. "This is private property." She raised an eyebrow, already reaching into a sleek tablet case. "Sir, my name is Jessica Wren. I'm Executive Director of Westview Developments. This land was officially cleared for development under permit 14C289. We're constructing the Whisper Ridge Sanctuary community here. We've completed all required steps with the county." "No. No, you haven't," I said, heart pounding. "This is Bellamy land. It's been in my family since 1918. I inherited it after my father passed." "You're on my land." She didn't even flinch. According to the most recent records, this parcel was marked as dormant and split during a county subdivision realignment last year. That eastern third was categorized as unclaimed and reclassified for residential zoning. My throat went dry. "I never received any notice, no contact, no public hearings." "I'm sorry you feel blindsided, Mr. Bellamy. Noah Bellamy." She nodded curtly. "If you believe there's been a clerical error, I encourage you to speak to the county recorder's office. But as of now, this project is fully funded, fully permitted, and already underway." She turned back to the surveyor, signaling him to proceed. I stood there, frozen, as steel teeth bit into sacred soil. I thought of Dad, of Grandpa Henry, of how they'd fought tooth and nail to keep this land untouched when developers circled like vultures back in the 80s. They'd won back then. I wasn't sure I'd win now. The rest of the day blurred past in a storm of unanswered phone calls, county transfers, and polite shrugs. The assessor's office told me the boundaries had been adjusted. The clerk sounded bored. "Notices were sent out last summer," she said, like it was my fault if they never arrived. The building inspector refused to meet with me. "All permits are in order," he said flatly over the phone. "You'll need to speak with a property attorney if you want to challenge it." I spoke to 3 different lawyers. The best one paused when I mentioned Westview Developments. "They have resources," he said carefully. "Taking them to court? You're looking at 2 years minimum and a couple $100,000 in legal fees. And that's if you're lucky." By nightfall, my boots were caked with red mud, and the hum of heavy equipment echoed through the valley. I stood on the ridge again, alone, watching as the once quiet land was gridded, paved, and parceled like meat at a butcher shop. Lights flickered on down below, temporary trailers for the work crews. Generators roared. My land, our land, was becoming theirs. I was outmuscled, outlawyered, outplanned. But that was before I remembered Grandpa Henry's warning, spoken like folklore years ago, half laughed off at the time. If someone tries to build on this land without a Bellamy's blessing, let 'em. Every nail they drive just digs their own hole. I thought he was being poetic. Turns out he was deadly serious. The next morning, I opened the chest. It sat beneath the stairs, where it had always been. Oak, hand-carved, iron-clasped, smelling faintly of cedar and dust. Dad called it the vault. Inside were 5 generations of Bellamy history. Old war medals, black and white photos, a lock of my great-grandmother's hair tied with a silk ribbon. And at the bottom, wrapped in oilskin and tied with fraying twine, was the deed. The original deed, signed in 1918. James T. Bellamy, to himself and all direct heirs. 80 acres, unencumbered, absolute ownership. But the real gem wasn't in the title itself. It was buried 4 pages deep, written in script so meticulous it looked like calligraphy. Should any third party construct permanent improvements upon this land, without notarized consent from a Bellamy heir, said improvements shall be forfeited in full to the legal owner of record, without need of compensation or restitution. I read it again, then a third time. I felt the hairs rise on the back of my neck. Great-Grandpa James had been a coal miner turned draftsman, paranoid of land grabs. He'd recorded this clause in 1919, had it notarized, and tucked it away like a time bomb, never thinking it would take a century to go off. My phone buzzed on the table. Jessica Wren. I ignored it. Instead, I drove to Roswell and Crane, the oldest law firm in the region. Thomas Crane was still alive, barely, 94 and half blind, but sharper than most men half his age. He'd been my father's counsel during the water rights dispute in the 90s. I placed the deed on his desk. He ran his fingers over it like it was Braille, then looked up and whistled. "Son," he said, "do you know what you have here?" "I think so," I replied. He leaned back, eyes gleaming. "This isn't just a deed. It's a bear trap made of legal steel." Thomas had his junior partner scan it into their archive and requested a full title search. "If this clause is still on the books, you don't just own that land, Noah. You own everything they're building on it, even if they finish it?" I asked. "Especially if they finish it." He grinned, all teeth. "But here's the thing, if you warn them now, they'll stop. They'll write off the loss and cut their damages. But if you wait, if you document everything, then I own 156 brand new homes," I finished. Thomas nodded slowly. "They're digging their own grave. You just have to let them." That night, I sat on the porch with Murphy and watched the lights dance on the hillside. I could hear saws whining, hammers tapping rhythmically, laughter from workers echoing through the trees. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt focus. This was chess now, and Jessica Wren had just castled into a trap 5 moves ago. I ordered a 4K drone camera and hired a private surveyor to mark every inch of my original boundary. Then I bought a 12-terabyte hard drive and began recording. Daily flights over the site, time-lapse construction footage, date-stamped photographs of foundation pouring, plumbing installation, rooftop framing. I logged every truck that crossed onto my land, noted license plates, tracked progress. By the end of the 3rd week, they had 24 homes framed. 7 were already drywalled. Sidewalks had been poured, street signs erected, a playground installed. All of it mine. They just didn't know it yet. Jessica stopped by again. She knocked on my door in a pristine white blouse and designer heels, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. "Mr. Bellamy," she said, tone syrupy, I hope you've had time to process our last conversation. Oh, I have, I replied. Then perhaps you'll consider selling your remaining acreage. Westview's willing to be generous. I tilted my head. Why the sudden interest in generosity? She flashed a politician's smile. Because I think you're beginning to understand we're not going away. The smart move is to work with us. Let's make you wealthy. Easier than court. I smiled back. Jessica, I said quietly, you've already made me wealthy. You just don't know it yet. Her eyes narrowed. Excuse me? I shut the door without another word. I wasn't being cruel. I was being patient. By mid-April, my land looked like it had been colonized. What used to be dense pine and soft brush was now a grid of cul-de-sacs and cookie-cutter homes, each with identical trim and identical lies. Jessica Wren didn't slow down. If anything, she was speeding up, pushing Westview to finish development before anyone could blink. But I wasn't blinking. I was watching. And I was digging. Not just into the dirt, but into the company behind the bulldozers. I hired a private investigator named Ria Torres. She was a former IRS forensic analyst who now ran her own data firm in Atlanta. Sharp, quiet, deadly efficient. In less than 2 weeks, she handed me a USB stick. What's this? I asked. Everything you didn't know you needed, she replied. On it were internal memos, shell company linkages, tax avoidance schemes, and, most damning, land acquisition irregularities going back 5 years. Jessica wasn't just a development director. She was a tactical force hired by Silver Glen Holdings, a parent company that specialized in finding soft title zones. Their entire business model revolved around exploiting misfiled records, minor boundary disputes, or overlooked legal provisions. They'd swoop in, start construction, and overwhelm homeowners into settlements, cheap buyouts before lawsuits could gain traction. Westview was just a front. Jessica was their closer. They'd done this before. Montana, Arizona, North Carolina. Sometimes they lost. But mostly they bullied their way through. The pieces snapped into place. That cold confidence Jessica had, it wasn't from inexperience. It was from repetition. I brought this to Thomas. He read through it slowly, then set the papers down with a long exhale. They're racketeers, corporate ones, and worse, they're smart. But they didn't count on the clause, I said. No, he agreed, tapping the yellow deed. They never imagined you'd be holding a live grenade, disguised as legalese from 1918. That night, I made my first anonymous drop. 3 flash drives, each with everything Ria had uncovered. One went to the county clerk, one to a local reporter named Devin Yang, and the last, most important, went to U.S. District Attorney Clara Vance, who happened to owe Thomas Crane a favor from a case he helped her father win 30 years ago. I didn't sign my name, but I didn't have to. Within a week, whispers started spreading. Homeowners began asking questions. A reporter showed up at the Oak Ridge build site. Jessica's smile didn't reach her eyes anymore. The next shift came subtly. Construction slowed. Permits were re-reviewed. Some inspections were delayed. But the biggest surprise? Jessica herself knocked on my door again. This time, no heels. She wore jeans, a denim jacket, and what looked like stress pressed into her skin like a second layer. Mr. Bellamy, she said, her voice less polished. We need to talk. I don't think we do, I replied, but stepped aside anyway. She looked around my living room at the framed photos on the mantel, the dusty old rifle above the fireplace. Her eyes landed on the original deed laid open on the coffee table. So it's real, she said softly. It's always been real, I replied. You just never bothered to check. She sat down, rubbing her forehead. You don't understand. Silver Glen doesn't lose. If they find out you've been feeding information to the press, they won't stop at legal action. They'll bury you. I smiled, faintly. Let them try. My grandfather fought in Normandy, my father in courtrooms. And me? I've spent the last 6 months building a case stronger than steel. Jessica looked at me differently now. No more arrogance, just calculation, fear. You're not what I expected, she said. You built an empire on arrogance, I said quietly. But this land was built on legacy. We don't lose to people like you. There was a long pause. Then she stood. Westview has already pre-sold the rest of the homes, she said. If this goes public, families will sue. The company will collapse. Investors will come for everyone. They should, I said. Because maybe then, people like you will think twice before building empires on stolen soil. She left without another word, and I knew the war had just turned. By early May, Westview was no longer just a development. It had become a powder keg, and all it needed was a match. That match came in the form of a leaked article. The reporter I'd sent the flash drive to, Devin Yang, had done his homework. His headline ran on the front page of the Atlanta Herald Sunday edition. The land they never owned. How a billion-dollar developer built a neighborhood on stolen ground. The article laid out the entire timeline. How Westview, backed by Silver Glen Holdings, had built 156 homes without verifying land rights, and how a century-old deed had rendered their entire project null. The piece didn't name me directly, but quoted legal experts, surveyed property lines, and cited historical documentation. The ripple effect was immediate. By noon, the HOA's phone lines crashed. Residents flooded Westview's temporary office demanding answers. Buyers started calling title companies. Facebook neighborhood groups exploded with accusations, confusion, and fear. Jessica tried damage control, but this wasn't the press she could charm into silence. Local news picked it up. Then, a national real estate watchdog blog ran with it. Within 48 hours, the HOA board was holding an emergency town hall. They didn't invite me. I went anyway. The community center was packed wall to wall. Tension charged the air like a thunderstorm about to break. Parents clutched toddlers. Retirees sat stiffly. Young couples who had poured everything into these homes were now wondering if they even owned them. Jessica stood behind a folding table with 2 other board members and a lawyer sweating through his collar. "Let's address the elephant in the room," she began, voice taut. "The story published this week contains serious inaccuracies and inflammatory language. Westview Holdings conducted all appropriate due diligence." "Then why does the county say the deed is real?" A voice cut through the air. "Why didn't my closing attorney find this?" another man shouted. Jessica's voice cracked. "We're working with legal counsel to resolve this." I stepped forward. No mic, just my voice. "You don't resolve theft by pretending it didn't happen." Dozens of heads turned. Jessica froze. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said calmly, "my name is Eli Bellamy. My family has owned this land since 1919. My great-grandfather, a veteran and farmer, purchased it acre by acre with money earned, digging ditches and breaking rock. The land wasn't abandoned. It was mine, and Westview never had the right to build on it." The room fell into stunned silence. I continued. "The original deed includes a rare provision, one that makes any unauthorized development on this land the legal property of the heir. Me. And your homes? They're sitting on that provision." Someone in the back muttered, "Oh my God." A woman near the front stood up. "Are you going to take our homes?" "No," I said quickly. "I'm not here to punish families who did nothing wrong. But Westview is. They lied to you. They lied to the city. And now they're hoping I'll let them off cheap." Jessica stepped in. "This isn't the place for grandstanding." I raised the leather folder in my hand. "I have surveys, legal opinions, county records. This development was built illegally. You don't need to believe me. Believe your own deeds. Check the lot numbers. They'll lead back to land titles that don't exist." People began murmuring. Whispers turned to outrage. Jessica's lawyer tried to take control. "We advise everyone to refrain from further discussion until proper channels." "You built a dream on stolen land," I said louder. "And now the dream is cracking." From the back, someone started clapping. Then others joined. The room erupted. Not in joy, but in fury. This wasn't a meeting anymore. It was an uprising. One by one, families stood up and began confronting the HOA board. They wanted answers. They wanted accountability. Some even demanded refunds. Jessica stood stiffly, white-knuckled, as the crowd turned against her. I slipped out during the chaos. My message was delivered, not to Jessica, to the people. And the people had finally woken up. It didn't take long after the town hall for Westview's carefully constructed empire to start cracking at the seams. Just 48 hours later, the first lawsuit was filed. Not by me, but by 3 homeowners who had closed on their homes within the last 60 days. Their claim? Fraudulent misrepresentation of property title. Within a week, 9 more families joined the suit. By the end of the month, there were 23 plaintiffs and counting. Jessica and her board tried to write it out. Westview's PR team issued sterile statements about ongoing discussions and legal reviews. But the community no longer trusted them. They trusted me. And the pressure was mounting. The press got involved. News vans began parking outside the main entrance of Oak Haven Ridge. The HOA tried to restrict them, but residents, many now openly hostile toward Jessica, waved them in. Local anchors stood on manicured sidewalks reporting the unfolding scandal. An entire neighborhood built on land the developer never legally owned. Tonight at 6, what it means for the families who bought the American dream on someone else's property. Meanwhile, my inbox was flooded with interview requests, partnership offers, and even interest from documentary producers. I ignored most of it. I wasn't after fame. I was after accountability. The internal collapse, then came the email leak. An anonymous source, likely a disgruntled Westview employee, sent me a chain of internal messages between Jessica, the company's legal team, and their lead surveyor. One email stood out like a thunderclap. "We know there's a title irregularity with Parcel B East. The county's old plats don't match our purchase maps. But if we stall, build fast, and close quickly, it'll be too late by the time anyone notices. Just push the permits through." They knew. They built anyway. I forwarded the chain to my legal team and the Georgia Attorney General's office. Within 5 business days, a state investigation was formally opened. The legal hammer falls. That same week, we filed a formal civil claim for unlawful development, unauthorized use of land, and fraudulent commercial exploitation. The damages we outlined totaled $68 million, not including punitive fees. Westview's attorneys responded with panicked counteroffers. First, $6 million. Then, $10 million. Then, $15 million. And a personal meeting with their executive board. I declined every time. Not because I wanted vengeance, but because they still hadn't grasped the depth of their betrayal. Not just to me, but to every family they used to enrich themselves. The turning point. It was during this chaos that I got a call from Mrs. Evelyn Rollins, a soft-spoken widow who lived in Lot 44. She invited me for tea. Her hands trembled as she poured from a floral china set, the living room neat and quiet. "I've lived in 12 cities," she said, "but no place ever felt like home until here. I tend my flowers every morning. My grandchildren play on that swing out back when they visit. And now I might lose it all." I leaned forward. "Mrs. Rollins, I promise, your home is safe. You are safe." She reached across the table and held my hand. "I don't care about lawsuits or settlements," she said. "But if you ever get the chance, make sure they never do this to anyone again." That was the moment I stopped thinking like a landowner and started acting like a guardian. The deal that changed everything. 2 days later, I met with my attorney, Ben, in a quiet office downtown. "They'll cave," he said. "But I think you can get more than money if you're strategic." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Leverage this, not just for yourself, for the community. for future communities. Use the trap your great-grandfather set not just to